It might be a little background. Alright. Reading. Force myself to read. Hold myself accountable. Reading The Stranger by Albert Camus. Helps me stay accountable for reading. So we're going to finish part 1. I didn't realize that this book's put into 2 different parts. So I believe... Where did I lay out? It's been a minute. Put this on. Do not disturb. I always forget to do that. Is Ramon? Wait. Old Salamano and his dog. His dog went missing. And he's worried about him going to the pound. Ramon is the guy that beats women, but Marcel doesn't really say much about it. I don't know. Chapter 5. Ramon called me at the office. He told me that a friend of his, he'd spoken to him about me, had invited me to spend the day Sunday at his little beach house near Algiers. Algiers? However you say that. I said I'd really like to, but I'd promised to spend the day with a girlfriend. Ramon immediately told me that she was invited too. His friend's wife would be very glad not to be alone with a bunch of men. I wanted to hang up right away because I know the boss doesn't like people calling us from town. But Ramon asked me to hang on and told me he could have passed on the invitation that evening. But he had something else to tell me. He'd been followed that day by a group of Arabs, one of whom was the brother of his former mistress. If you see him hanging around the building when you get home this evening, let me know. I said I would. A little later my boss sent for me, and for a second I was annoyed because I thought he was going to tell me to do less talking on the phone and more work. But that wasn't it at all. He told me he wanted to talk to me about a plan of his that was still pretty vague. He just wanted to have my opinion on the matter. He was planning to open an office in Paris which would handle his business directly with the big companies, on the spot, and he wanted to know how I felt about going there. I'd be able to live in Paris and travel around for a part of the year as well. You're young, and it seems to me it's kind of the life that would appeal to you. I said yes, but that was really all it was. I said yes, but that really it was all the same to me. He then asked me if I was interested in a change of life. I said that people never change their lives, that in any case one life was as good as another, and that I wasn't dissatisfied with mine here at all. He looked upset and told me that I never gave him a straight answer, and that I had no ambition, and that I was disastrous in business. So I went back to work. I would rather not have upset him, but I couldn't see any reason to change my life. Looking back on it, I wasn't unhappy. When I was a student, I had lots of ambitions like that. But when I had to give up my studies, I learned very quickly that none of it really mattered. That evening, Marie came by to see me and asked me if I wanted to marry her. I said it didn't make any difference to me that we could if she wanted to. Then she wanted to know if I loved her. I answered the same way I had last time, but it didn't mean anything but I probably didn't love her. So why marry me then? She said. I explained to her that it didn't really matter, that if she wanted to, we could get married. Besides, she was the only one who was doing the asking. All I was saying was yes. Then she pointed out that marriage was a serious thing. I said no. She stopped talking for a minute and looked at me without saying anything. Then she spoke. She just wanted to know if I would have accepted the same proposal from another woman with whom I was involved with in the same way. I said sure. Then she said she wondered if she loved me, and there was no way I could know about that. After another moment's silence, she mumbled that I was peculiar, that was probably why she loved me, but that one day I might hate her for the same reason. I didn't say anything because I didn't have anything to add, so she took my arm with a smile and she said she wanted to marry me. I said we could do whatever she wanted. We could do it whenever she wanted. Then I told her about my boss's proposition. She said she'd love to see Paris. I told her that I'd lived there once, and she asked me what it Everybody's pale. The women were beautiful, and I asked anything, but I wanted her to stay with me, and I told her that she would have liked to, but she has something to do. She had we were near my place, and I said goodbye to her. She looked at me. Don't you want to know what I have to do? She seemed to be scolding me. Then, seeing me so confused, she laughed again, and she moved toward me with her whole body to offer me her lips. I had dinner at Celeste's. She could sit at my table. Of course she could. Her gestures were jerky, and she had bright eyes and a little face like an apple. She took off her jacket, called Celeste over, and ordered her whole meal all at once, in a voice that was clear and very fast at the same time. While she was waiting for her first course, she opened her bag, took out a slip of paper and a pencil, added up the bill in advance, then took the exact amount plus tip out of a vest pocket and set it down on the table in front of her. At that point, the waiter brought her first course, and she gulped it down. While waiting for her next course, she again took out her whole bag, a blue pencil, and a magazine that listed the radio programs for the week. One by one, and with great care, she checked off almost every program. Since the magazine was about a dozen pages long, she meticulously continued this task throughout the meal. I had already finished, and she was still checking away with the same zeal. Then she stood up, put her jacket back onto the same robot-like movements, and left. I didn't have anything to do, so I left too and followed her for a while. She had positioned herself right next to the curb and was making her way with incredible speed and assurance, never once swerving or looking around. I eventually lost sight of her and turned back. I thought about how peculiar she was, but forgot about her a few minutes later. I found old Salamano waiting outside my door. I asked him in, and he told me that his dog was lost because it wasn't at the pound. The people who worked there had told him that maybe it had been run over. He asked if he could find out at the police station. They told him that they didn't keep track of things like that because they happened every day. I told old Salamano that he could get another dog, but he was right to point out to me that he was used to this one. I was sitting cross-legged on my bed, and Salamano had sat down on a chair in front of the table. He was facing me, and he had both hands on his knees. He had kept his old felt hat on. He was mumbling bits and pieces of sentences through his yellowing mustache. He was getting on my nerves a little, but I didn't have anything to do, and I didn't feel sleepy. Just for something to say, I asked him about his dog. He told me he'd gotten it after his wife died. He had married fairly late. When he was young, he wanted to go into the theater. In the army, he used to act in military vaudevilles. But he had ended up working on the railroads, and he didn't regret it, because now he had a small pension. He hadn't been happy with his wife. He'd pretty much gotten used to her. When she died, he had been very lonely, so he asked him to live as long as a man. They ended up being old together. He was bad-tempered, Salamano said. We'd have a run-in every now and then, but he was a good dog just the same. I said he was well-bred, and Salamano looked pleased. And, he added, you didn't know him before he got sick. His coat was the best thing about him. Every night and every morning after the dog had gotten that skin disease, Salamano rubbed him with the ointment. But according to him, the dog's real sickness was old age, and there was no cure for old age. True. There isn't. Happens eventually. At that point I yawned, and the old man said he'd be going. I told him that he could stay and that I was sorry about what had happened to his dog. He thanked me. He told me that God, that's his mom's name or whatever. He told me that Maman was very fond of his dog. Does that mean I can still be heard, or? I don't know what that means. Does that mean I can still be heard? I have to check. Let me just check real quick. Okay, so it's just saying gameplay can't be broadcasted. I don't know why on earth it would tell me that if it just continued to broadcast it, but whatever. Okay. Mammon was very fond of his dog. He called her your poor mother. He said he supposed I must be very sad since Mammon died, and I didn't say anything. Then he said very quickly and with an embarrassed look that he realized that some people in the neighborhood thought badly of me for having sent Mammon to the home, but he knew me, and he knew I loved her very much. I still don't know why, but I said that until then I hadn't realized that people thought badly of me for doing it, but that the home had seemed like the natural thing since I didn't have enough money to have Mammon cared for. Anyway, I added, it had been a long time since she had anything to say to me, and she was bored all by herself. Yes, he said, and at least in a home you can make a few friends. Then he said goodnight. He wanted to sleep. His life had changed now, and he wasn't too sure what he was going to do. For the first time since I'd known him, with a furtive gesture, he offered me his hand, and I felt the scales on his skin. He gave me a smile, and before he left, he said, I hope the dogs don't bark tonight. I always think it's mine. Okay, that was chapter 5. I had to do a summary of the chapter because I want to work on retention for reading, and I think summarizing would help. What I gathered was, while he was working, Ramon called him, invited him to a party with his friend, I think, and his friend and his wife. He said, I worried about his boss being upset with him on the phone. He said, maybe not. I don't remember his answer exactly. And then he's like, well, I would love to. Oh, that's what it was. I would love to, but I promised I would hang out with a girlfriend today. And then Ramon immediately said, bring her too. Don't remember what he said after that, but then his boss later called him in. He thought he was going to be upset. Then he's like offering him an office job in Paris. To which he said, that's fine. Making it clear that his life doesn't change. Doesn't change whether he's there or not. And the boss got upset with him, saying he's lazy, he's disastrous for the company, he has no ambitions. And he starts reminiscing about school, and then when he had to give it up, his studies, he realized that none of it mattered at all. Then he started hanging out with Maria. And she started pressing him on marriage, love, all this and that. And he's like, I'm okay if we get married. Doesn't really make a difference or anything. Like, total sociopath behavior, in my opinion. Then they hung out, and then he offered her to hang out or go to dinner, and she said, no, I have somewhere to be. Then she was kind of like, you don't want to know where I'm going? I hadn't thought about it to ask, but I did wonder. Then when he gets back into his apartment, he notices old Salamano is at his door. Starts talking about the dog again. Oh, there was, after Maria left, he went to Celeste. Some girl sat down, I think. And he pointed out how she robotically ordered the menu, wrote everything down, its bills, and then plus the tip, and pulled it all out of her money satchel and put it down. Just devoured each plate of food that came, and then just like got up and left. That was a weird thing to point out. When we watch the review, it might make sense. But then he goes home. Old Salamano's waiting at his door, and they start talking about the dog. And how old Salamano mentions, like, hey, I got this dog after my wife died. I wasn't too fond of her, but I tolerated it. I can't get a new dog because I was used to this one. And then as he's about to leave, he's like, I know Mammon was important to you. He's like, yeah. Yup, she was. And he's like, people used to talk shit about you because you put her in a home. Huh. No, he knows I love her and I cared about her. I don't know why though. He's like autistic as hell. Okay, let's watch the review. I got a PSN voice message. What? I don't know what he's saying in there. If you're watching, I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what's being said. The Stranger, Chapter 5, summary, not part 2, part 1. Okay.
Provide them with the highest quality of care and also spend the time that these patients deserve.
Let's see if my summary was accurate.
In part 1, chapter 5 of The Stranger, Merceau at work talks to Raymond on the phone. They make plans to spend Sunday with friends of Raymond at a beach
Marie,
house.
that's what her name was.
Raymond mentions that he's being followed by Arabs.
Oh,
Who
yeah.
was the brother of his former mistress.
That he
A
beat.
little later, the boss calls Merceau into his office and offers Merceau an opportunity to work in Paris and asks him if he is interested. Merceau replies nonchalantly that it doesn't matter to him. This response upsets the boss, who accuses Merceau of having no ambition. Merceau admits to himself that he lost any ambition when he gave up his studies. That evening, Marie asks Merceau to marry her. He replies that marrying her does not really matter to him.
That I don't
He'll
know.
consent if she really wants to get married. Marie gets upset and wonders whether Merceau loves her. He replies that he probably doesn't. Marie believes a couple who plan to marry should love each other because marriage is a serious thing. But Merceau does not think it is serious. Marie comments that Merceau is peculiar, but she thinks perhaps she loves him because he is different. Merceau and Marie take a walk through the streets. Merceau asks Marie to have dinner with him, but she says no. While Merceau eats dinner at Celeste's, a small woman sitting across from him orders dinner, adds up her bill on a slip of paper, and checks off radio programs in a magazine with robot-like zeal. Curious about the woman, Merceau follows her when she leaves. She makes her way with incredible speed and assurance, never once swerving or looking around. Merceau loses track of the woman and forgets about her within a few minutes. Back at his apartment, Merceau finds Salamano waiting for him. The old man tells Merceau that his dog wasn't at the pound. Merceau suggests Salamano get another dog. Salamano describes to Merceau how he got the dog as a puppy and raised it, revealing a strong bond with the dog. Merceau, bored by the story, yarns. Salamano says that some people disapproved of Merceau institutionalizing his mother. Merceau had no idea people thought that, and explains he put his mother in a home for financial reasons and placed no sentimental value on it. Salamano shakes Merceau's hand and leaves. Merceau, a passive person, views life as a series of events, all of which lack importance. Indeed, getting married has no meaning for him. However, Marie realizes she loves Merceau because of his strangeness. Merceau's honesty is refreshing for her, as he's not one to play games. Yet his viewpoint alienates him from most people. He has become a person who is unable to interact in meaningful ways with others. Merceau is curious about the strange little woman at the restaurant because, from Merceau's alienated view, she is the stranger because she defies his worldview and appears to find meaning in routines.
I'm wondering if I'm picking up on the theme of this book, and if if it's really bad that I haven't yet. Apologize. All right. I think this is gonna finish off part 1 when I finish this. Yeah, this is how much is left of part 1. Then it goes into part 2, which I wasn't aware of. I realized it when I was like flipping through the pages and I saw chapter 5, then I go all the way to the end to see how many chapters there are, and it said chapter 5 again. I was kind of like, what? But, okay. So, chapter 6. Finishing part 1. So much. It's taking me a while to read this little ass book. But, a book is a book, a win is a win. Alright, let's crank this one. Chapter 6. I had a hard time waking up on Sunday, and Maria had to call me and shake me. We didn't eat anything because we wanted to get to the beach early. I felt completely drained and I had a slight headache. My cigarette tasted bitter. Marie made fun of me because she said I had on a funeral face. She had put on a white linen dress and let her hair down. I told her she was beautiful and she laughed with delight. On our way downstairs, we knocked on Ramon's door. He told us he'd be right down. Once out in the street, because I was so tired and also because we hadn't opened the blinds, the day, already bright with the sun, hit me like a slap. Oh, excuse me. That was a horrible string of sentences with commas. Let me try that again. Once out in the street, because I was so tired and also because we hadn't opened the blinds, the day, already bright with the sun. Wow. This is just rough for me. Once out in the street, because I was so tired and also because we hadn't opened the blinds, the day, already bright with sun, hit me like a slap in the face. Marie was jumping with joy and kept on saying what a beautiful day it was. I felt a little better and I noticed that I was hungry. I told Marie, who pointed to her oilcloth bag where she'd put our bathing suits in a towel. I just had to wait, and then we heard Ramon shutting his door. He had on a blue trousers and a white short-sleeved shirt. But he'd put on a straw hat, which made Marie laugh, and his forearms were all white under the black hairs. I found it a little repulsive. He was whistling as he came down the stairs, and he seemed very cheerful. He said, "Good morning, old man," to me, and called Marie Mademoiselle, however you say that. The day before, we'd gone to the police station, and I'd testified that the girl had cheated on Ramon. He'd gotten off with warning. They didn't check out my statement. Outside the front door, we talked about it with Ramon, and then we decided to take the bus. The beach wasn't very far, but we'd get there sooner that way. Ramon thought his friend would be glad to see us get there early. We were just about to leave when all of a sudden Ramon motioned to me to look across the street. I saw a group of Arabs leaning against the front door of the tobacconist's shop. They were staring at us in silence, but in that way of theirs, as if we were nothing but stones or dead trees. Ramon told me that the second one from the left was his man, and he seemed worried. But, he added, it was all settled now. Marie didn't really understand and asked us what was wrong. I told her that they were Arabs who were in it for Raymond, who had it in for Ramon. His names. She wanted to get going right away. Ramon drew himself up and laughed, saying we'd better step on it. We headed toward the bus stop, which wasn't far, and Ramon said that the Arabs weren't following us. I turned around. They were still in the same place, and they were looking with the same indifference at the spot where we had just been standing. We caught the bus. Ramon, who seemed very relieved, kept on cracking jokes for Marie. I couldn't tell if he liked her, but she hardly said anything to him. Every once in a while, she'd look at him and laugh. We got off in the outskirts of Algiers. The beach wasn't far from the bus stop, but we had to cross a small plateau which overlooks the sea and then drops steeply down to the beach. It was covered with yellowish rocks and the whitest asphaltals set against the already hard blue. What? It was covered with the yellowish rocks and the whitest asphaltals set against the already hard blue of the sky. Marie was having fun scattering the petals, taking big swipes at them with her oilcloth bag. When we walked between rows of small houses behind green or white fences, some with their verandas hidden. What are these words, dude? These aren't words. These are not fucking words. What does this mean? Verandas? Verandas. 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 Okay. So it's like a roof that extends from the building that's like open. However you explain that, I guess. Small houses behind green or white fences. Some fences. Behind green or white fences. Some with their verandas hidden and behind the tamarisks? What are these things? Holy shit. Why am I going to Google every third word? Okay. Oh, fat thumbing it. Tamarisks? Okay, so it's a type of flower. Jesus Christ. With their verandas hidden behind the tamarisks. Others standing naked among the rocks. Before we reached the edge of the plateau, we could already see the motionless sea and farther out, a massive, drowsy-looking promontory in the clear water. Oh my God, why do I gotta Google this? What is all these words they're just thrown in there? Promontos? That is not a word. It's not popping up. Promontory. So it was. A high point of land or rock that projects into a body of water or overlooks a lowland. Either that or it's wine. So I'm gonna take a shot in the dark and assume it's talking about a high point of a rock. Why we couldn't just say why we have to use such cryptic fucking words? It might be cryptic to me because I just don't know them, but still. Drowsy looking promontory in the clear water. The faint hum of a motor rose up to us in the still air. And way off, we saw a tiny trawler. Oh my God, how many other words are going to be in here that I just don't know? Okay, that should be it. I don't notice any other word. Trawler. Decided to hit me hard with this one. Boat used for fishing or a pleasure craft. Whatever a pleasure craft is. Tiny trawler moving, almost imperceptibly, across the dazzling sea. Marie gathered some irises. What's an iris? I know the word, I don't know what it is. I'll let him slide, but that's like a half credit. Plants, okay. Irises. From the slope leading down to the beach, we could see that there were already some people swimming. Ramon's friend lived in a little wooden bungalow at the far end of the beach. The back of the house rested up against the rocks, and the pilings that held it up in the front went straight down into the water. Ramon introduced us. His friend's name was Masson. Mason or Masson? I'm gonna guess it's gonna be Masson, but I'll be kind of pissed if it's Mason. That'd be such bullshit. Masson. He was a big guy, very tall and broad-shouldered, with a plump, sweet little wife with a Parisian accent. Right off, he told us to make ourselves at home and said that his wife had just fried up some fish he'd caught that morning. I told him how nice his house was, and he told me that he'd spent Saturdays and Sundays and all his days off there. With my wife, of course, he added. Just then his wife was laughing with Marie. For the first time, maybe, I really thought I was going to get married. Masson wanted to go for a swim, but his wife and Ramon didn't want to come. The three of us went down to the beach, and Marie jumped right in. Masson and I waited a little. He spoke slowly. I noticed that he had a habit of finishing everything he said with a and I'd even say, when it really didn't add on to anything of meaning to his sentence. Referring to Marie, he said, "She's stunning," and I'd even say charming. After that, I didn't pay any more attention to this mannerism of his, because I was absorbed by the feeling that the sun was going to do me a lot of good. The sand was starting to get hot underfoot. I held back the urge to get into the water a minute longer, but I finally said to Masan, "Shall we?" I dove in. He waded in slowly and started swimming only when he couldn't touch the bottom anymore. He did the breaststroke, and not too well either. So I left him and joined Marie. The water was cold and I was glad to be swimming. Together again, Marie and I swam out a ways, and we felt a closeness as we moved in unison and were happy. Out in the deeper water, we floated on our backs, and the sun on my upturned face was drying, the last of the water trickling into my mouth. We saw Masan making his way back to the beach to stretch out in the sun. From far away, he looked huge. Marie wanted us to go swim together. I got behind her to hold her around the waist, and she used her arms to move us forward. I did the kicking. The little splashing sound followed us through the morning air until I got tired. I left Marie and headed back, swimming smoothly and breathing easily. On the beach, I stretched out on my stomach, alongside Masan and my face on the sand. I said it was nice, and he agreed. Soon afterwards, Marie came back. I rolled over to watch her coming. She was glistening all over with salty water and holding her hair back. She lay down right next to me, and the combined warmth with her body from the sun made me doze off. Marie shook me and told me that Masan had gone back up to the house and that it was time for lunch. I got up right away because I was hungry, but Marie told me I hadn't kissed her since that morning. It was true. I hadn't kissed her since that morning. It was true, and yet I had wanted to. "Come into the water," she said. We ran and threw ourselves into the first little waves. We swam a few strokes, and she reached out and held on to me. I felt her legs wrap around mine, and I wanted her. When we got back, Masan was already calling us. I said I was starving, and then out of the blue, he announced to his wife that he liked me. The bread was good. I devoured my share of the fish. After that, there were some meat and fried potatoes. We all ate without talking. Masan drank a lot of wine and kept filling my glass. By the time the coffee came, my head felt heavy and I smoked a lot. Masan, Ramon, and I talked about spending August together at the beach sharing expenses. Suddenly Marie said, "Do you know what time it is?" "It's only 11:30. We were all surprised, but Masan said we'd eaten very early and that this was only natural because lunchtime was whenever you were hungry. For some reason that made Marie laugh. I think she had a little too much to drink. Then Masan asked me if I wanted to go for a walk on the beach with him. My wife always takes a nap after lunch. Me, I don't like naps. I need to walk. I tell her all the time it's better for her health, but it's her business. Marie said she'd stay and help Madame Masson with the dishes. The little Parigini. Oh my god. I'm not having fun with this chapter. All because of the weird fucking words they're throwing in here. Trawler? I've never heard of that. Porentory? Like, it took me forever to finish that page. Verandis? Taramisks? Tamarisks? Yeah, okay. Verandis? Tamarisks? Promontory? Trawler? Irises? And now what is it telling me to look at? Paracini? Like, what? A Persian girl or woman? What? Parisian? Parisian? Okay. The little Parisian said that first they'd have to get rid of the men. The three of us went down to the beach. The sun was shining almost directly overhead overhead onto the sand and the glare of the water was unbearable. There was no one left on the beach. From inside the bungalows bordering the plateau and jutting out over the water, we could hear the rattling of plates and silverware. It was hard to breathe in the rocky heat rising from the ground. At first, Raymond and Masson discussed people and things I didn't know about. I gathered they'd known each other for a long time and had even lived together at one point. We head down to the sea and walked along the water's edge. Now and then a little wave would come up higher than the others and went out Cambish. Jeez. This translation's rough. Now and then a little wave would come up higher than the others and wet our canvas shoes. I wasn't thinking about anything because I was half asleep from the sun beating down on my bare head. At that point, Ramon said something to Masson which I didn't quite catch. But at the same time, I noticed, at the far end of the beach and a long way from us, 2 Arabs in blue overalls coming in our direction. I looked at Ramon and he said, "It's him." We kept walking. Masson asked how they'd managed to follow us all this way. I thought they must have seen us get on the bus with a beach bag. But I didn't say anything. The Arabs were walking slowly, but they were already much closer. We didn't change our pace. But Ramon said, "If there's any trouble, Masson, you take the other one. I'll take care of my man. Marcel, if another one shows up, he's yours." I said, "Yes." And Masson put his hands in his pockets. The blazing sand looked red to me now. We moved steadily toward the Arabs. The distance between us was getting shorter and shorter. When we were just a few steps away from each other, the Arab stopped. Masson and I slowed down. Ramon went right up to his man. I couldn't hear what he said to him, but the other guy made a move as though they were going to butt him. Then Ramon struck the first blow and called Masson right away. Masson went for the one that had been pointed out as his and hit him twice as hard as he could. The Arab fell flat in the water, face down, and lay there for several seconds with bubbles bursting on the surface around his head. Meanwhile, Ramon had landed one too, and the other Arab's face was bleeding. Ramon turned to me and said, "Watch this. I'm going to let him have it now," I shouted. "Look out, he's got a knife," but Ramon's arm had already been cut open and his mouth slashed. Masson lunged forward, but the other Arab had gotten back up and had gone around behind the one with the knife. We didn't dare move. They started backing off slowly without taking their eyes off us, keeping us at bay with the knife. When they thought they were far enough away, they took off running as fast as they could while we stood there motionless in the sun, and Ramon clutched at his arm, dripping with blood. Masson immediately said that there was a doctor who spent his Sundays up on the plateau. Ramon wanted to see him right away. But every time he tried to talk, the blood bubbled in his mouth. We steadied him and made our way back to the bungalow as quickly as we could. Once there, Ramon said that there were only flesh wounds and that he could make it to the doctor's. He left with Masson, and I stayed to explain to the woman what happened. Madame Masson was crying and Marie was very pale. I didn't like having to explain to them, so I just shut up, smoked a cigarette, and looked at the sea. Ramon came back with Masson around 1:30. His arm was bandaged up, and he had an adhesive plaster on the corner of his mouth. The doctor had told him that it was nothing, but Ramon looked pretty grim. Masson tried to make him laugh, but he still wouldn't say anything. When he said he was going to look down at the beach, I asked him where he was going. He said he wanted to get some air. Masson and I said we'd go with him. But that made him angry, and he swore at us. Masson did not argue with him. Masson said not to argue with him. I followed him anyways. We walked back on the beach for a long time. By now the sun was overpowering. It shattered into little pieces on the sand and water. I had the impression that Ramon knew where he was going, but I was probably wrong. At the far end of the beach we finally came to a little spring running down through the sand behind the large rock. There we found our 2 Arabs. They were lying down in the greasy overalls. They seemed perfectly calm and almost content. Our coming changed nothing. The one who attacked Ramon was looking at him without saying anything. The other one was blowing through a little reed over and over again, watching us out of the corner of his eye. He kept repeating the only 3 notes he could get out of his instrument. The whole time there was nothing but the sun and silence, with the low gurgling from the spring, the 3 notes. Then Ramon had put his hand in his hip pocket, but the others didn't move. They just kept looking at each other. I noticed that the toes on the one playing the flute were tensed. But without taking his eyes off his adversary, Ramon asked me, should I let him have it? I thought that if I said no, he'd get himself all worked up and shoot for sure. All I said was, he hasn't said anything yet. It'd be pretty lousy to shoot him like that. You could still hear the sound of the water and the flute deep within the silence and the heat. Then Ramon said, so I'll call him something, and when he answers back, I'll let him have it. I answered, right, but if he doesn't draw his knife, you can't shoot. Ramon started getting worked up. The other Arab went on playing, and both of them were watching every move Ramon made. No, I said to Ramon. Take him on man to man and give me your gun. If the other one moves in, or if he draws his knife, I'll let him have it. The sun glinted off Ramon's gun as he handed it to me. But we just stood there motionless, as if everything had closed in around us. We stared at each other without blinking. And everything came to a stop there between the sea, the sand, and the sun, and the double silence of the flute and the water. It was then that I realized that you could either shoot or not shoot. But all of a sudden, the Arabs backing away slipped behind the rock. Oh, okay. But all of a sudden, the Arabs backing away slipped behind the rock, so Ramon and I turned and headed back the way we'd come. He seemed better and talked about the bus back. I went with him as far as the bungalow, and as he climbed the wooden steps, I stood there at the bottom, my head ringing from the sun, unable to face the effort it would take to climb the wooden staircase and face the women again. But the heat was so intense that if it was just as bad standing still in the blinding stream falling from the sky. To stay or to go, it amounted to the same thing. A minute later, I turned back towards the beach and started walking. There was the same dazzling red glare. The sea gasped for air with each shallow, stifled little wave that broke onto the sand. Sand. I was walking slowly toward the rocks, and I could feel my forehead swelling under the sun. All the heat was pressing down on me and making it hard for me to go on. And every time I felt a blast of its hot breath strike my face, I gritted my teeth, clenched my fists in my trouser pockets, and strained every nerve in order to overcome the sun and thick drunkenness that was spilling over me. With every blade of light that flashed off the sand with a bleached shell or a broken piece of glass, my jaw tightened. I walked for a long time. From a distance, I could see the small, dark mass of rock surrounded by a blinding halo of light in the sea spray. I was thinking of the cool spring behind the rock. I wanted to hear the murmur of its water again, to escape the sun and the strain on the woman's tears, and to find shade and rest again at last. But as I got closer, I saw that Ramon's man had come back. He was alone. He was lying on his back, with his hands behind his head, his forehead in the shade of the rock, the rest of his body in the sun. His blue overalls seemed to be steaming in the heat. I was a little surprised. As far as I was concerned, the whole thing was over, and I'd gone there without even thinking about it. As soon as he saw me, he sat up a little and put his hand in his pocket. Naturally, I gripped Ramon's gun inside my jacket. Then he lay back again, without taking his hand out of his pocket. I was pretty far away from him, about 10 meters or so. I could tell he was glancing at me now and then through his half-closed eyes. But most of the time, he was just a form shimmering before my eyes in the fury air. The sound of the waves was even lazier, more drawn out than at noon. It was the same sun, the same light still shining on the same sand as before. For 2 hours the day had stood still. For 2 hours it had been anchored in a sea of molten lead. On the horizon a tiny steamer went by, and I made out the black dot from the corner of my eye because I hadn't stopped watching the Arab. It occurred to me that all I had to do was turn around and then it would be the end of it. But the whole beach, throbbing in the sun, was pressing on my back. I took a few steps toward the spring. The Arab didn't move. Besides, he was still pretty far away. Maybe it was the shadows on his face, but it looked like he was laughing. I waited. The sun was starting to burn my cheeks, and I could feel drops of sweat gathering in my eyebrows. The sun was the same as it had been the day I'd buried Memon. and like them, my forehead especially was hurting me, all the veins in it throbbing under my skin. It was this burning, which I couldn't stand anymore, that made me move forward. I knew that it was stupid, that I wouldn't get the sun off me by stepping forward, but I took one step forward, and this time, without getting up, the Arab drew his knife and held it up to me in the sun. The light shot off the steel, and it was like a long, flashing blade cutting my forehead. At the same instant, the sweat in my eyebrows dripped down over my eyelids all at once and covered them in a warm, thick film. My eyes were blinded behind the curtain of tears and salt. All I could feel were the symbols of sunlight crashing on my forehead, and an indistinctly dazzling spear flying up from the knife in front of me. This is an exhausting amount of imagery he's laying out about how bright and hot the sun is. Like, I get it. It's blinding. You're hot. Holy shit. Like, I'm just so exhausted reading about how bright and hot the sun is right now. Holy shit. The scorching blade slashed at my eyelashes and stabbed at my stinging eyes. That's when everything began to reel. The sea carried up a thick, fiery breath. It seemed to me as if the sky split open from one end to the other to rain down fire. My whole being tensed, and I squeezed my hand around the revolver. The trigger gave. I felt the smooth underside of the butt. And there, in that noise, sharp and deafening at the same time, is where it all started. I shook off the sweat and sun. I knew that I had shattered the harmony of the day, the exceptional silence of a beach where I had been happy. Then I fired 4 more times at the motionless body where the bullets lodged without leaving a trace. And it was like knocking 4 quick times on a door of unhappiness. Wow, so he just shot him. He killed him. That's it. We're on part 2 now. Okay. Alright. Is there even rain? God, it's so like deafening quiet. I'm gonna critique the book here and say that was rather annoying. It was starting to get annoying because he just kept going on. Maybe it was they'll probably explain it in a way that makes sense, but like it was just getting very exhausting listening and reading constantly how hot and bright and intense the sun was, dude. It was getting kind of annoying, but maybe there was a point to it. Maybe there was a point to say that was exaggerating it and like putting it in my mind like, God, okay, it's just so hot. It's just so hot, and you can only say it's so hot and bright so many different ways. I don't know. I'm interested to see what this says. My summary of it was, yeah, met with Marie, and as they were getting ready to go to the beach, Ramon, they were waiting for her. Then on the way on a bus stop, I don't remember if it was they made a stop and then saw a bunch of Arabs. I don't remember. But then they got in the bus, got off, started walking. And then, as they were walking, oops. They were walking, and then they met up with Masan, right? I'm assuming that's Masan, not Mason. Masan and his wife at the beach house. It was like a little wooden bungalow. And then they meet the missus. It's like Madame Masan, whatever that means. And then they hang out at the beach. Marie and Ramon stays back at the house with the madam. Then Masan, Marceau, and Marie all go out. They swim. They go to the beach. Hang out. Sit in the sun. And then they wake up. They go. They eat lunch. Then Marceau, Masan, and Ramon all go for a walk. They come across 2 Arabs. They get into a little fight. One of them has a knife, cuts Ramon in his mouth, and slashes his arm open. After that, I think Masan wails onto one of them, and then they face plant into the water, bubbling water around their head. They back off. They leave after the knife is pulled and cuts Ramon. Then they go back. Masson takes Ramon to go get fixed up by a doctor. It's a Sunday, but they know a doctor that's nearby. Marceau starts explaining it, and then the madam starts crying, and Marie looks pale, and he just doesn't want to be bothered with this reaction, so he just stops talking and just starts smoking and watching the sea. Then when they come back, they go for another walk. They see the two Arabs laying down. Ramon's contemplating heavily to shoot him. Marceau convinces them, hey, let me take the gun. You can take him man to man, and if anything happens, I'll pull it out and I'll let him have it. They decide to walk back. Then, before they climb back up into the house, the bungalow, Marceau decides, this is too much. It's whether I go up there or I stay right here, it's still going to be hot and miserable. So he starts walking. Then he comes across one of the Arabs laying down, and then we just get an abundance of imagery describing how painfully hot and bright all the sun is. And then he approaches the Arab. I almost said Muslim. The Arab, and then eventually just unloads the entire revolver, all the bullets into him. So, let's see how accurate that was. Watched him kill a man.
In part 1, chapter 6 of The Stranger, Marie wakes Marceau on Sunday morning, but he has trouble shaking his sleepiness. Marie is excited about going to the beach. They get dressed and meet Raymond. The day before, Marceau had testified at the police station on Raymond's behalf.
Oh, that's right.
And Raymond was released with a warning. Heading to the bus, Raymond points out a group of Arabs watching them. Marceau explains to Marie that the Arabs have an in for Raymond. The three companions hurry onto the bus and get off near the beach. They walk along the motionless sea to a wooden bungalow where Raymond's friend Masson lives. Marceau and Marie swim together and rest on the beach.
I was right.
Then, back at the bungalow, everyone devours lunch. After lunch, Marceau, Raymond, and Masson go for a walk on the beach.
Okay.
Soon, the three come across the Arabs from the bus stop. Raymond confronts one of them, and a fight breaks out, during which Masson and Raymond each punch an Arab. One Arab slashes Raymond's arm and face with a knife. The Arabs back off and then run away. Marceau, Raymond, and Masson hurry back to the bungalow.
Raymond,
takes
Marceau, and
Raymond to
Masson.
see a doctor. After about an hour, Masson returns to the bungalow with a grim and bandaged Raymond. Under the heat of the sun, Marceau walks with Raymond on the beach. They meet the Arabs near a spring. Raymond holds a gun in his pocket and asks Marceau, should I let him have it? Marceau tells Raymond to let the Arabs make the first move. Raymond should give him the gun and fight the Arab man to man. If the Arab draws his knife, Marceau should shoot him. Raymond hands the gun to Marceau, but the Arabs back away and hide behind a rock. Marceau and Raymond head back to the bungalow. Then Marceau walks back down to the beach alone. The sun and heat become overbearing for him. Near the spring, he comes upon the Arab with the knife. The Arab is lying on his back. Marceau is surprised and grips the gun in his pocket. The two stare at each other for a long time. Marceau moves a few steps toward the spring. His head begins to throb from the heat, which reminds him of the day he buried Maman. He takes a step forward.
Maman.
The Arab draws his knife. The light reflects off the steel like a long, flashing blade cutting at his forehead. Marceau feels as if the sky has opened up and is raining down fire on him. In response, he takes out the revolver and squeezes the trigger. Marceau fires 4 more times into the motionless body. Marceau uses pleasant sensations to escape from the painful absurdity of life, but harsh sensations like heat or bad smells raise his awareness of life's oppressiveness. He becomes so absorbed by the sun's harsh, glaring rays that when he shoots, he momentarily forgets he is holding a gun.
Okay. So, I mean, that was interesting. That's an interesting way to end the first part of the book. Okay, I'm excited to read the second half, see what happens. I'm on page 63 now is what that page starts on. If I were to, let's see, how many more pages? 63. 107's the... Oh, no, it's not. Okay, so there is no chapter 6 on part 2. Ends at 123. So I'm over halfway done. Over halfway. So there's still 5 more chapters after he murders a man. I wonder what part 2, is it going to take place from a different perspective? Or is it going to carry on Marceau after he murders somebody? Is he going to be like in jail? Is he going to get off? Is he not going to get caught? I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see where that goes. So far, translation's still kind of difficult to read for me. But again, I'm not a very experienced reader. I've only read about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 full books. The last one I read was a biography. So I think the biggest book I've ever read is 420 pages, The God of Illusion. And I remember bits and pieces of it just because it took me over a year to read. I just sporadically. I read the first 3 chapters in like a week. And then the next 7 I spread out over the course of like 11 months. So I don't remember everything from that book. But okay, thank you. I'll be back again. Kisses.